Welcome to CapitolView, the weekly program on state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on CapitolView is Dave McKinney, politics and government reporter for WBEZ Radio in Chicago. Welcome, Dave.
Bruce, good to see you.
It's good to see you. Also, Kent Redfield, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at University of Illinois, Springfield. Welcome, Professor Redfield.
Good to be here.
Good. Well, there was some news that hit just yesterday. We are taping a couple days before this will air, but the news this week has been Sam McCann, former State Senator Sam McCann. The federal prosecutors yesterday announced that he's been indicted, and boy, what a boatload of trouble he appears to be in. 7 counts, I believe, of wire fraud. There's also money laundering, tax evasion. If they throw the book at him and things go unluckily for him, he could be facing 20 years in the hoo-ha. And this is not something that is perhaps a surprise to folks who have followed the saga of former state senator Sam McCann over the years. He was a state senator from 2011 to, I believe, 2019. He made an unsuccessful run for governor in 2018 and got, I believe, 4% of the vote. There have been allegations going back years, at least to 2014, that he had been dipping into campaign funds for such things as mileage. I believe he claimed something like $38,000 in mileage in the course of 1 year. He also had large expenditures that weren't itemized, checks that were written from his campaign account for quote unquote grouped expenditures. The Illinois State Board of Elections had taken a complaint on this years ago. In 2016, as he was preparing to face, make sure I get this right, Bryce Benton, I think, was the name of his opponent in the GOP primary. And the charges did not, or the accusations back then, did not affect his political future. He was reelected as a state senator. Now he's been alleged to have bought four vehicles. Let me get this straight. $61,000 SUV, a 2018 Ford 250 pickup truck, a used motorhome for $25,000, and a brand new travel trailer for $18,000 or something like that. The one that I guess, to me at least, made me go, geez, this is interesting, was he is alleged by prosecutors to have bought the RV and the travel trailer and then established accounts at an Ohio RV brokerage business and rented the RVs he owned to himself and ended up pocketing, according to prosecutors, more than $50,000. And the RV broker, who has not been accused of any wrongdoing, got something like $9,000 in the deal. Kent, are you surprised that something like this might happen in the state of Illinois?
Well, I'm surprised at the magnitude of what's alleged. And I mean, historically, you could spend your campaign fund. This is the money that people give you to run for office. An official committee formed under the law and does reports to the State Board of Elections. So prior to the late 90s, you could pretty much do a lot of what is alleged in terms of McCann's actions. Now, committing financial fraud, essentially, renting something to yourself and pocketing the money, obviously, is way beyond the Illinois campaign finance law. I mean, bribery, extortion, corrupt
Is that okay?
practices.
I can't remember. Go ahead.
Yeah, but so he's alleged to have taken money essentially from his account into his personal account and then paid his mortgage. Prior to 1999, that would not have been illegal. Now it certainly is illegal. The problem with these things getting looked at in Illinois is that you file reports with the State Board of Elections. They have in their financial disclosure office staff that goes through and make sure the proper papers are filed, make sure the numbers add up. They do not have the power to initiate audits except in extreme cases. They don't bring actions on themselves. Things get initiated by someone filing a complaint. And so if you keep a low profile, once you leave office, if you've got money in your fund, or even while you're in office, you can abuse it. The general rule is no personal use. If you create an income tax liability, then you violated Illinois' law, as well as you're in trouble with the IRS if you don't report it. But what you've got here is someone who is really pushed the limits of the ambiguous parts, and in a number of cases clearly stepped across the line. I mean, if you go out to lunch and take a constituent to lunch and you talk politics and you charge it to your campaign fund, is that personal use, or is that a political purpose? If you do it every day, year in and year out, it's probably an abuse, but it's ambiguous. So this is clearly a case where the law is not drawn narrowly enough, and the State Board of Elections doesn't have the resources, and frankly, they don't have the authority to be proactive in terms of these cases. But this looks like if what's alleged is true, he is in really serious trouble.
Yeah. I'm wondering, I'm not particularly shocked, frankly, and nobody should be, I think, that an elected official or former elected official in Illinois has been accused of breaking the law. What I'm kind of more interested in is, what does this teach us? What should we draw from this in terms of the structure of how we keep folks honest? And I guess I'm maybe referring here to the Illinois State Board of Elections. As you mentioned, Professor, audits are rare and only in extreme circumstances. Wasn't this kind of an extreme circumstance going back a long time? If they're not going to audit Sam McCann, who are they going to audit?
Well, it has to be audit for cause, or they do some random audits. But ultimately,
I do think they do that, but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you have to get a majority on a board that is 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, and they generally are aggressive in going after independent candidates and third parties. They tend not to be aggressive in terms of going after, the Democrats don't want to gang up on, don't want the Republicans to gang up on them, and vice versa. So it's very difficult to get an assertive action out of the state board. It's a structural problem. It also is about, we could require every candidate who holds public office to file a yearly audit of their campaign fund, certified by an accountant, but we don't do that.
What about going forward here after you've left office? Because in McCann's case, the feds have alleged that he was stealing money up until last June. And he hasn't held office in Illinois for a number of years. And this was the guise of his conservative party of Illinois never really went very far, other than to promote his own candidacy for governor. And yet state law allows these campaign funds to exist in perpetuity.
Yeah. So unlike other states, we don't require people to close out their funds, and how they spend that money. We've had former public officials hire themselves as consultants to their fund, which doesn't seem to be doing anything at all. The money sits there forever. It's also a question of who owns the money. It's a separate entity. We indicted Citizens for Ryan, and the feds did, and put it out of business before they ever went after George Ryan. We had a fight between Judy Bar Topinka's son and her longtime aide about who owned and controlled Topinka's campaign fund after she died. It's an area that, frankly needs attention, and this just illustrates the problem.
Yeah, and I think at least locally here in Springfield, you just reminded me of something. When former Mayor Davlin met an untimely end, I believe in 2007-ish, his campaign fund was transferred to the Catholic Church. And there amid allegations that he had stolen from the church. And so, I guess and we do have politicians. Jim Edgar, for example, hasn't been an elected official since 1999. He's still got $250,000 in his campaign fund. And I'm not accusing of any wrongdoing. I mean, I took a quick look. He gives to good causes, performing arts centers, various charities, that sort of thing. But is it okay once you're elected, if you're a good fundraiser? Senator Larry Baumke locally is another example. He has in excess of $300,000. And he's used that at times to promote certain political candidates. But is it okay for someone to build this kind of a treasure chest and then be able to? I think Jim Ryan may have had some money still when he died. Is that to me is a big question mark? And doesn't it kind of, on some level, create temptation that doesn't need to be there, or create an expectation of, I am a big, important elected politician in Illinois, and for the rest of my life, I will be able to throw money around.
Yeah, opportunity for corruption, appearance of corruption, those two things are corrosive to the public support of the process and politics. I don't think anybody listening to our discussion this morning is reassured about the integrity of Illinois politics. And so it's something certainly needs to be addressed.
Hey, I want to correct one thing I said just a few minutes ago with regard to Jim Ryan. I meant Jim Thompson, the former governor. Jim Ryan is not dead. He's alive and well, and good health to him. I meant my own brain screwing up once again, but it was Jim Thompson, the former governor, who I meant to say. And he's, I believe, had his campaign fund was alive and well long after he became governor. Dave, I mean, what do you think about the use of some of these campaign funds? For one thing, they're being used for legal expenses for politicians sometimes who are caught in legal binds. Is that legal, and is that on one level, and is it okay on the other level?
Well, I mean, it's legal on the basis that they argue that these fees arise from, the official duties that these politicians perform, and you could understand if there was a ballot challenge, for example, or if there was, anything associated with getting elected, certainly, and remaining in office, certainly. That's what they're there for. But the idea that they can be used for legal fees in cases like this, we don't know, of course, if McCann will do that. I mean, his balance, I haven't
$35,565 when I checked last night.
All right, $35,000. Let me see. That will pay for probably, I don't know, a few hundred hours, if that.
That'll pay for some Cheetos and the Hooskow, but go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So in his case, it might not apply, but in other cases, one example that comes to mind is former House Speaker Michael Madigan. We know that the federal prosecutors in Chicago have had him in their crosshairs because of the Commonwealth Edison bribery case, and there's been at least one lawsuit in federal court that has arose in which he is a named defendant, arising from the ComEd scandal, and he's been using his campaign fund, the Friends of Michael J. Madigan Fund, to pay some of these fees. And the most recent filing from October to December of last year, he had spent about $1 million out of that fund on legal fees to the lawyer that's handling, the civil lawsuit and helping in the criminal case. I mean, Madigan has not been charged, of course, but he's still in the crosshairs. Since the start of 2000, I think the same law firm has gotten about $1.7 million from him. So you can see that's an example of how these funds get used for that purpose. You go back to Rod Blagojevich. I think he wound up using about $2.5 million or a little more than that out of his campaign fund to pay for the legal defense in a couple of his trials. So that's an area where it's hard to envision any kind of serious reform as is the case with anything related to these campaign funds, because politicians want as much flexibility and leeway as they can in how this money gets spent. Yeah. And I agree with what Kent said that, because there is no serious audit function anywhere, the only way in which any of this stuff gets exposed is through reporting or through a criminal investigation that might arise. But I don't know. I think with McCann, McCann is what's particularly audacious about the McCann allegations is that at least a chunk of this activity was occurring during his run for governor. And it really kind of raises questions like, not only about the behavior and the judgment, but it's like, what was the real purpose behind the run for governor? Was, knowing that there were financial problems apparently here, mm-hmm. was that sort of a side focus that somebody says, well, I could run for governor and raise a little bit of money and maybe help out with personal expenditures. It's not clear if that's, at all in play here, mm-hmm. but it begs the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely it does. And let's hope that Mr. McCann is somewhat of an outlier here. I mean, you've read I presume we've all read the indictment, and you're just looking at it saying, was he in politics to achieve public good or to frankly line his pocket? And you read the amounts of money involved and the things that he was alleged to have done, and it's a fair question to ask.
On the flip side, Bruce, the thing to consider, to keep in mind too. I mean, we have to presume he's innocent until proven guilty, of course.
Correct.
The U.S. Attorney's Office in Springfield, they have had a bit of a checkered past in terms of some of these public corruption cases. I mean, they've been quite effective. They were under the Blagojevich era in prosecuting state grant fraud cases, but the most recent high-profile public corruption case they took on involved former Congressman Aaron Schock, and that was that wound up just completely unraveling. And so mm-hmm. in this case, I think I'll be quite interested in seeing who Senator McCann winds up getting as a lawyer here, and what their credentials are, and how capable they are in fighting this.
And that's an excellent point, Dave. He is innocent until proven guilty, and the Schock investigation did entirely unravel. There are still, with regard to Aaron Schock, there's legalities, and there's also the sniff test. And you'll recall the fancy office, garishly decorated, and Instagram photos from all over the world. And Aaron Schock was kind of he flew too close to the sun, maybe not just in a legalistic sense, but it just didn't look good. And there have been questions about how the U.S. Attorney's Office did handle that investigation. It went, as I recall, it was transferred out of the local out of Illinois up to higher ups, I believe, even in Washington, D.C., and it was taken out of the Springfield office. And so the point well taken. He is innocent until proven guilty. Moving on for a second, let's talk about some constitutional things that the Republicans want to do to make us a better government state. Kent, you're more up on this than perhaps I am. What do they want to do, and is it a good idea, and does it have any chance whatsoever?
Well, in order to get constitutional amendments on the ballot, you have to get supermajorities, and it is unlikely that the Democrats are going to give up the status quo. We're talking about a change in the recall provision that will allow you to recall public officials at all levels, not just the governor. A provision that would allow voters to petition to essentially overturn a specific law. In this case, think about all of the outcry against the Criminal Justice Reform Act that was passed at the end of the lame duck session. Under this provision, you could gather signatures if it was approved to go on the ballot. That would essentially suspend the law at that point, and if it did not win a majority, if it were overturned by the voters, it would be stricken from the statutes. The third one is to open up the citizens' initiative for constitutional amendments, which is right now you have a limited ability to amend a legislative article. You can't amend any of the other articles. This would open up the Constitution for amendments to provide property tax caps, spending limits. You could go into the education article where it says the state has the primary responsibility to fund education, which the court has ruled as basically being aspirational and unenforceable. And you could put in language that said the state's responsible for 50% of the operating costs of all public K through 12 schools. So it's a very, very broad power. You can, the things that I might want to have put in the Constitution might not be, I might not be things other people approve with. The problem with amending the Constitution is you're stuck. And we were stuck with limits on counties and municipalities incurring debt and raising property taxes. And that produced all of the special districts that we have in Illinois, park districts, library districts, mosquito abatement districts. So, you can make mistakes that you have to live with for 100 years when you amend the Constitution. So, it's worth discussing, but it's from a practical sense, it's not going to happen. The Illinois General Assembly is not going to put these things on the ballot under the control of the Democrats.
But we can dream, can't we? I
think about the only place that, like, the only entity that's going to truly be behind that are the TV station operators, because, any kind of ballot initiative, any kind of thing, hundreds of millions of dollars in ads. So, but yeah, if these were serious efforts, they would have involved Democrats in the rollout, and they didn't.
Sure.
So they're more simply just to kind of raise a ruckus a little bit by Republicans, and good for them. But they don't have serious traction.
They don't have serious traction, that's true, but they're not necessarily wrong in this sense that you look at states on the progressive states such as Washington State, Oregon, California, and they do have some of these things. There is a real power of initiative and referendum that's held by voters, and it has made a difference in some of those states in terms of getting actually good government legislation passed. In Washington State, for example, that's how their version of FOIA in the 1970s. It wasn't the legislature that said open up government records. It was folks that actually back then, before the internet, they stood on street corners, gathered signatures, and thereby came about one of the stronger public records laws in the entire United States. Shoreline Management Act, environmental issues, they also did that in Washington State. They legalized cannabis in Washington State through a citizen initiative. Granted, it's not going to happen, but it would be some folks would say maybe it would be nice to have that check, perhaps, on elected officials.
On the flip side, though, I think you would find a lot of public sector unions who would disagree with you, because, imagine if there were groups, some of the business groups that decided, well, hey, we want to get rid of the provision, the pension clause in the state constitution, because we're tired of paying the compounding COLA, and that would be a very real threat. I think that. I get the idea about, giving, empowering voters with another tool, but I think that the concept introduces a whole new level of chaos into a system that, doesn't seem to operate under any, clear-cut set of rules to begin with, and I think that, I do think that there's the idea of a vote for a legislator or a vote for a governor ought to mean something. And these legislative bodies, we've set them up to make laws and to strike down laws, and that ought to be where the focus is at. Getting people elected that support a cause, and then getting that cause passed through a legislature. And I get that legislatures aren't responsive; they don't want to do things that affect their own interest. For example, transparency, or as we were talking about earlier in the show, with serious reform for campaign finance. But we already have a system set up in place. Maybe it's not working the best, but I would really be concerned that you could have all these kinds of efforts just zooming in from all over the place that would inject all sorts of chaos into our lives.
Yeah, no, and that's a point well taken. On the other hand, though, you take something like public sector pension benefits. It's constitutionally protected, but there's also a strong argument that it's also protected by contract clauses outside of any kind of a constitutional guarantee. That once you have made a deal with somebody, you've made a deal with somebody, and you can't pull the rug out from underneath them. So I'm not sure that I'll buy that as much as on other levels, because I think the concern is that you start legislating through who can pay the most signature gatherers and have the biggest TV campaigns on.
Certainly been the case in terms of California. I mean, petition drives favor the organized and the wealthy, and that's not just citizens groups, that's extremely large corporations, extremely wealthy individuals. Now, you can put in relief, you can put in kind of pressure valves. But if you look at Washington's law, it's a lot broader than what we're talking about today.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we spent a lot of time talking about Senator McCann, and we left other things on the table, and we're just about out of time. Wish we could have talked, my fault, could have spent more time talking about vaccines. Now politicians are going to get vaccinated so they can go back and make laws, but we'll have to talk about that another time. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on Capitol View. See you next week.